joining us bright and early on this Monday morning shortly after time changed. It is great to have you guys all here, and we have a lot to talk about today. Just in case anyone's not aware, my name is Rima Atung. I'm the grant coordinator for the RJ program. And just a reminder for everyone, this is a public meeting. We are recording. Please, if you need to ask a question, we appreciate it if you raise your hand or put it in the chat just so we can make sure to get to everyone. And today we're going to be looking at the provisional planning grantee applications for their second half of funding, as well as going through the solicitation for what we hope are 25-27 funds for this program, and talking through what the Grant Advisory Committee role will be in that process. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, welcome. This is our agenda for the day. I did want to note that I moved the public comment period up to right after we talk about the provisional planning grantees. It was at the end of the presentation before, but I wanted to make sure folks had a chance to comment related to that part of the agenda, the provisional planning grantees, before we do a vote with GAC members. So that has been moved up. Otherwise, everything is the same. Can we go ahead and do roll call now, please, Avery?
Yes, I can call roll.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tristan Edwards.
I'm here.
Thank you. Kathleen Meehan-Coop.
Here.
Thank you. Shannon Wilson.
Sorry, little trouble. I'm here.
No problem. Thank you. Harry Naughton.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here.
Wonderful. Simon Fulford.
I'm here.
Nice. Okay, Brandon Brown.
I'm here as well.
Thank you. Elaine Walters.
I'm here.
Thank you. Jimena Ospina Todd.
Here.
Thank you. Michael Kaiser.
I believe he'll be joining us a little late.
Awesome. So that is roll, and we have quorum, Rima.
That is excellent. I'm so happy so many people could attend. Hopefully, our new strategy of trying to schedule these meetings even further ahead of time is helpful. And we'll talk about scheduling the next meeting towards the end of this presentation as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Let's go ahead and jump in. So first, we're going to do the review and recommendations for those provisional planning grantees. I apologize for the short turnaround time. It always ends up being even shorter than we anticipate. I know we got the last application or report, whatever we happen to call it, uploaded just at the end of the day Friday. So hopefully you guys had a chance to look at everything. If not, we're gonna go through it now. So just a reminder, we had selected those 4 planning grantee applicants: Bridge Pamoja, Latino Network, Medicine Wheel Recovery Services, and Transformative Justice Community, as being awarded provisionally. And what that entailed was they received 3 months of funding and half of their initially requested amount. And they had a requirement, since you folks had questions when we went through their applications, that they respond to those concerns and show that they were meeting the definition of restorative justice and the definition of planning as we defined, and then made any changes to their budget that needed to happen based on any changes they needed to make to their project description. Some of them had responded to certain questions during the application process, so we took that information as well as a pretty simple report that they had to submit March 1st, which hopefully you folks had a chance to look at to see if they met those requirements. So that's kind of what we're looking through today. So we're just going to jump right in. So the first provisional grantee was Bridge Pomoja. I included just their basic program description that they had from their initial application. They initially asked for 31,510 in funds. So that first disbursement that I mentioned that has already happened was for half of that, 15,755. So what we're really looking at today is to see if this if you guys would like to approve this or this second disbursement, excuse me. I think I need more coffee. And I do want to just remind everyone, so this amount, this total provisional award amount is sort of what you folks recommended to the CJC Commission and what the Commission then approved as awarding up to this amount. So this has technically already been approved up to that amount for this project, contingent on them meeting these requirements. Any questions or concerns so far? No? All right. Thank you, people who are shaking your heads. I appreciate it. So just a reminder, the reasons or the concerns that were brought up during our conversation previously was that they had food in their budget, which was an unallowable cost. It was unclear from the response if the proposed program was prevention or RJ. And the Grant Advisory Committee, recommended funding it with the caveat that it was for planning for RJ services only. So their response was to remove food from the budget. And they provided a little bit more clarity in their report that what they're doing is gathering input for a community-based alternative to the criminal and juvenile legal system that complies with RJ requirements. And how they're doing that is conducting true trauma summits, engaging with current partners, Multnomah DA, to work on mapping out a program, and then getting feedback from, Multnomah DA is a new partner, and then getting feedback from current partners, City of Gresham and REAP. So any questions or concerns about their response to this, or any conversation that you folks want to have?
This is Simon. Well, I think ultimately I think they've responded to the questions. It clearly focuses on their planning. I wasn't at the grant review process that this committee had a couple months ago when these were approved or provisionally approved. So I think they've responded. I'm supportive of the disbursement of the next phase of funding. I feel like this is duplicating and other activities that may already be occurring, but hopefully they can align themselves with some of the other existing restorative justice grant programs in Multnomah County, in the Portland area. So I would encourage them to kind of coordinate that, particularly with a view to whatever might go forward should there be future funding.
And it looks like Tristan has her hand up.
Hi. I would echo what Simon said. I am supportive of continuing the funding. I did find, I think like in the original application and also in this follow-up, there's just been a lot of vagueness around what that restorative justice element would look like. And I noticed in both of the applications, the kind of details around restorative justice are essentially pulled directly from the OAR. And so I guess I just am saying that if Bridge Pomoja ends up applying for the grant cycle of 25 to 27, I would just want so much more specificity about what they really mean by restorative justice and how they're planning to implement that, or what their idea is for what that looks like in their community. Because it's been pretty vague. And I would, echo what Simon said around encouraging them to connect with the other restorative justice programs in Multnomah County to see if there's ground for partnership there, and also making sure that there isn't kind of like a duplication of services. But I'm supportive of continuing the planning period.
Thank you for that comment. And it looks like Elaine has her hand up next.
Yes, everything they've already said, plus I found it interesting that the summits were named trauma summits. So they're much more generalized summits than restorative justice too. So having not gone to those or seen the program announcements, I'm not sure what the depth of focus on restorative practices or restorative justice look like in the, I'm really supportive of people doing restorative justice with a trauma-informed or trauma-aware lens, but I find it interesting that that's what was highlighted, were trauma summits rather than restorative justice gatherings.
Yep. Thank you for that comment. Anything else? We do have the budget still to look at, although I believe it's the same as the previous budget, but maybe I'll just scroll forward. So again, yes, so they didn't make any changes to their proposed budget, so the second disbursement would just go to all the same activities. I don't know if that skews anyone in one direction or the other, but just for
Well,
your
just along the same lines, if they still have yet another trauma gathering to have, really prioritizing and centering restorative justice, if this is a portion of that funding cost for their trauma summits, that this money be spent on the part that's focused on restorative justice planning, or if it's the full budget for their gatherings, how to make sure that restorative justice is central to that gathering, that it be in the title, that it be in the goals, that it be part of the project.
Thank you for that. So the way I figured we would do this is go through all 4 of the applications and then do the public comment and then the vote. If anyone wants to do it differently, please let me know. But on that note, is there anything else that anyone wants to share about this initial application? All right. In that case, we'll move on to the second one, which is for Latino Network. Just a reminder what their program goals were are shared here on the screen. Their initial ask was for $49,124. They received half of that, so we're talking about the second disbursement for $24,562. The reasons for their provisional status were it was requested that they provided some additional justification to show the training that they're talking about attending is RJ related. The GAC determined that they wanted to fund this project with the caveat that this is a new RJ program and not capacity building, and that funds be used for front-end RJ activities only. The grantee response, this first bullet here was actually provided through the initial application process. So we might have shared some verbally at the GAC meeting, but just, from that process, they did clarify and provide some additional information on that training, which they said would expand their program to young women. It was culturally and restorative justice focused. Then in their second application, they mentioned incorporating, they're right now working on examining incorporating circle process and other restorative dialogue components into their existing youth diversion programs. And they have been working on developing MOUs and expanded partnerships in Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah counties. And similar to the last applicant, they didn't make any changes to their budget. They adjusted their timeline slightly, but their budget is the same. So do we have any conversation concerns around Latino Networks provisional application?
Yeah, I can kick us off.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that they really were very responsive to the questions that we had last time, or at least the questions that I had around kind of how restorative justice was going to be integrated into their programming. I think one of the concerns that I had was, are they just trying to, integrate some more restorative practices, or are they really trying to integrate the use of restorative justice as conflict resolution into the diversion program? I would say based on their response, it's not entirely clear to me whether they are planning to, train Latino network facilitators to do, RJ processes as part of the diversion program, or if it is going to be a better fit for them to contract with a different restorative justice provider and kind of send their cases there. But I think that that's part of what the planning period is trying to determine. And so I am supportive of continuing this planning period.
Okay, thank you. And Simon, looks like you had your hand up for next.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a naysayer. When I read this, I feel like it really is just. I mean, first of all, that the youth diversion, the funded projects with the counties. I don't see how this fits with the intent of the RJ program, which is diverting youth away. The youth are already being diverted away. I don't understand how this is doing anything more than what they're already doing. It feels just like capacity building. I love incorporating more RJ into any diversion work. There was RJ and diversion in Clackamas County for about 20 years. So I didn't see that in the first time. Again, I missed the grant approval meeting several months ago. But I don't see that in here now. I'm sorry to say that. And I love my friends at Latino Network.
Thank you for that comment. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts on this application?
Yes, I will. Can you go back to the slide right before?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest places that I see restorative justice happening or being incorporated sort of differently is in that second bullet, examining, incorporating circle process and restorative dialogue into existing. I mean, if that is a completely new approach to what they've been doing, I think that the fact that they serve over 900 youth and that they are considering it, and I guess without knowing what that means, what the process of examining looks like, and what the MOU development is looking like, which I don't think we know that about a lot of things, those details. But if those details are moving in this direction, I feel very supportive of it. And even if they examine and decide what was said earlier about maybe they decide they're going to refer instead of to host themselves, that could be a fine outcome. But it'll be good to know as they kind of complete this what they discovered and how they did that process. But if these two things are moving forward specifically around restorative justice incorporation, I feel supportive of it.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment at this time? All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next application. So the next provisional grantee is Medicine Wheel Recovery Services. Their initial ask was on the lower side, $22,030. So they have a second disbursement of $11,015 pending your approval. Some of the concerns that were brought up were the personnel budget seemed to primarily support service delivery when they first submitted it, not planning activities. So we funded them contingent on that kind of switching. And then we also funded them with the caveat that they were creating a new component of their existing program that included RJ services, and that the funds be used for front-end pre-adjudication RJ services only. So they did have a clarification during the review process that the personnel costs were for planning activities and related training. They did provide more clarity on the activities that they have been doing and hopefully will continue to do, which were, creating connections with community partners, developing a timeline, creating implementation guidelines. And the goal of their new program is to foster accountability in the responsible party and support the harm party pre-adjudication. They also had a budget that was the same as their previous. So they mostly provided more clarification on the activities they would be conducting and how that fit in with the planning grant and RJ services. Any comments or concerns about this application?
Looks good.
And Simon has his hand up. It looked like, okay, Kathleen, you put your hand up right after. So Simon, go ahead.
I'm the yeah. Again, I'm not. I wasn't convinced by the proposal in the first place. Yeah, I don't see that this is diverting folks away from the criminal justice system with that key intent. Again, I feel like what they're saying might be duplicating other kind of law enforcement, and I know that's system-led diversion programs. That said, it's a small grant, and I'm be interested to see where they get with it, but I am wholly unconvinced that this fits with the ultimate intent of the grant program.
Okay, thank you for that. I did want to bring one thing up on my initial slide at that last GAC meeting. I had put Clackamas County as their service area, but it's actually Columbia County. So I apologize for that mistake. Okay, Kathleen, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I have to agree with what Simon said. I'm also reading their new proposal. It provided so little detail. I was really kind of struggling with where they were going and what their kind of goals were. So it was lacking information for me. I have to say kind of all of the proposals honestly were lacking a lot of information. They were not as detailed as I was really hoping that we would get, particularly since we had gone back to them with specific questions. But this one had probably the least amount of detail.
Yeah, I agree.
And Tristan, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I guess a little bit more of the same. I remember the last time when we had read the grant application, it seemed to be suggesting that restorative justice services would be integrated into a post-conviction program. And then there was an email to follow up and where they clarified, no, this would be diversion. And so since there was so little about that in the original application, I had hoped that there would be a little bit more fleshed out in this one. I think the approach that I'm taking at least is giving a lot of latitude, in part because this isn't a full grant application. This is allowing people to get ready so that they can submit one for 25 to 27. If there was grant, I mean, frankly, for most of these, if I saw like this level of detail coming through at a full grant application, I would not feel optimistic or be supportive of spending that money. But since this is still the planning stage, since I know that these programs are receiving our feedback and hopefully adjusting accordingly, at least they have included a little bit more detail explaining that this would be pre-conviction, and that's their intent in terms of the development of the program. I'm willing to support this with the hope that if Medicine Wheel is applying for a grant in the middle of this year for the full biennium, that we have a lot more detail as to what that's really going to look like and who those partners are going to be.
Thank you for that comment. Hopefully folks are, we post recordings for all these meetings on YouTube. Hopefully folks are referring back to them as they fill out their new applications for the next year. So we appreciate your putting those concerns on record. Did anyone else have comments? Looked like Elaine, you might have taken your mute off. Did you have something to add?
No, I wonder, I guess I'm starting to wonder if some of why we're not getting back more detail is the way we're asking, because it seemed like there were sort of almost verbatim our responses to our question. In this grant, when we said that it needed to be pre-adjudication, that's what they wrote back. This what we want to focus on, pre-adjudication. We want to add, based on our success in our post-adjudication work, we want to add this new component to pre-adjudication, and they talked about the planning, and it's not a very large grant, right? And so there's a way that I think they directly answered what we asked them to. But if we wanted more detail in how or who, I kind of feel like we have to think a little bit. We have to ask it, because they did. We asked the question and they answered back within the requirements. So they met the requirement by saying they were going to meet the requirement. If we want more evidence of how they're going to meet that requirement, I think we need to be very specific, especially if we're going back for, if we're giving people a chance at a second shot. We need to kind of outline, I think, we need more detail, we need more depth, we need more explanation of how, not just that you're going to meet it, but how you're going to meet that. I'm just wondering about that based on all of these applications being sort of like that in some way. That they said yes, we'll do what you say, but if we want more detail about how, I just think we might need to be more specific.
I think that is excellent feedback as well to consider as we move forward into the next solicitation process. So please keep that in mind. We did build in more time for applicants to actually get questions from you folks and respond to them. That we'll go over that, during the next part of this presentation. But I think that's a very I think that comment is very similar to thoughts we had, and thank you for sharing that. So, anything else specific to Medicine Wheel Recovery Services and their application? Oh, alrighty, we'll move on to the last provisional application, which is for Transformative Justice Community. So they were one of the larger requests. Their total approved award is $151,750. So they're waiting on a second disbursement of $75,875. The concerns that were expressed previously were that their budget may include some unallowable costs, and we wanted to fund with the caveat that the program is serving probationers and parolees who commit new crimes rather than preventing recidivism among probationers and parolees. How they responded to this was they did revise their proposed program and budget to focus on using those reentry peers or reps as credible messengers to help justice impacted communities heal from harm rather than intervening when there were parole violations. And the funds stated were going to be specifically used to conduct a comprehensive community needs assessment, build partnerships, and develop a culturally responsive RJ program. So they did have some changes to their budget, not the total amount, but they moved some of the categories around. I think most they moved a little bit more into personnel, and then they moved quite a bit out of administrative costs into some of those other equipment, supplies, rent, utilities. So those were the changes they made. Do folks have any questions or concerns or comments on this application? So Tristan?
Yeah, so it strikes me that there has been quite a bit of kind of like a reexamination of the original proposal, which I very much appreciate, because I had a lot of hesitancy in supporting the original proposal. It seemed like a lofty goal to the point of almost being impossible. And this seems to be kind of revisioning what they're trying to do within the scope of kind of what regroup and the transformative justice community's strengths are. There was a little bit of vagueness in the application, but if I'm understanding it correctly, I think my understanding is that they are aiming to essentially do community referral restorative justice within the formerly incarcerated community, which I think is an excellent direction for this project to take. I also felt like this, when compared to the other applications, just had a lot more detail in terms of what they are planning to do and kind of what their intended outcomes are. And I was happy to see the shift to more personnel to get yeah, just more people involved in terms of supporting the different elements of the planning activities. And it's always good to see engagement in community readiness assessment. So I am supportive.
Thank you. And Simon, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Negative today, but I mean, I echo what Tristan said. I didn't think the initial proposal really, it didn't seem, seemed like a totally responding to folks post process. I like Tristan's very generous interpretation of kind of how they responded. I just remain not overly convinced.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment?
I guess we have a trio of us. I would love to hear other voices of people that are sort of here, I know, paying attention, because these are really important decisions on a couple of levels, because these are preparatory for additional funding requests that are going to come our way. So I think the tighter we can make this process, I mean, I think it's a bit of an interesting dilemma that we've had, which is we've had enough money to fund everything that's been asked, which puts us in a more generous position, but it may also make it, I don't want to set folks up for applying for funding that they're not going to be able to apply for next time. And so I'll say my thoughts after the folks that raised their hands that haven't spoken yet on this particular proposal. Yeah.
Thank you. And it looked like Shannon has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate everybody that has kind of taken the lead on the conversation here so far this morning. One of the things that I kind of noticed in some of these, especially this one, when they're talking about dedicating 50% of the grant to different positions, I just wonder if it'd be more effective, especially if you're in a planning phase, to focus just dedicated positions focused on developing this type of program, because it seems like you know, just speaking from like a nonprofit management perspective, it seems like when you do that, when you spread out especially when you're doing like an initial project planning, to have those individuals be focused on that project and not have it just like woven into their other duties that are kind of already there. I think that would, I think, give me a little bit of like help me grow a little bit more confidence in these types of proposals. When the position is identified, it's specifically dedicated towards this grant, especially when getting something off the ground and not just like supplementing the work that's already being done. So that's my recommendation for that. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. It looks like Kathleen also has a hand up.
Mine was along the same lines. I was concerned about the amount of staff time. I mean, if this was a pilot program or an implementation project, I mean, it's equivalent to, if I'm reading it correctly, about 3.5 FTE for a planning project. I know planning takes a lot of time, so I get that, but it seems like a lot of staff for a project that's kind of an edit to something that they're already kind of doing. So I was surprised by the amount of staff time committed to the project.
Thank you for sharing that.
So it's interesting how on the one hand it does look like this proposal, and it's not. I mean, what I liked a lot about their response is that they duly noted and corrected for where things they had originally proposed were outside of what was allowable, and they fleshed out a way to ask for funding that they knew we wanted to give them to do the things that were within the scope. And it does look like it includes both restorative justice practice and planning with the way, and I guess the other thing that keeps getting confusing is we really want people to have paid staff dedicated. So, you know, one of the pushes is to see people, like some of our concerns with the smaller grants was that they weren't paying their staff enough, or that they weren't adding enough staff. So to me, again, our own clarity and priorities around, you know, really wanting to nudge people towards having sufficient, adequate staff, and versus you know, being understaffed and overextended. So I support this grant. I think we're going to have to kind of keep paying attention, and I'm hoping that some of those folks are listening in on our conversation. That they're being very creative around how they're working on restorative justice. I really appreciate the understanding that there's an overlap in parties harmed versus people causing harm, and I think it's a unique attempt that I would like to see stay within the bounds of what's possible, but also really explore some of the things that they're being very creative about. So I feel supportive of it. I think we're going to have to get our own systems and priorities a little bit tighter within the scope of the funding.
Thank you for sharing that. I do want to just remind folks of a few of the themes we kind of heard in the last GAC meeting. And that was that because these are planning grants, as was stated previously, there's been a little more latitude given because at the time it was discussed that it was important to encourage these restorative justice practices to kind of be more broadly utilized, of course, with some caveats on, you know, how it was done and making sure it was done correctly. I do also want to note that for today, the discussion is really focused on, you know, these were grants that we approved provisionally previously and decided to fund up to that request amount. And the concerns that were stated at the last GAC meeting and were incorporated into their contracts as something they had to respond to get the second disbursement of funding are kind of listed on the slide. So we have to kind of remain focused on those concerns and make sure that their response addressed those concerns adequately, but we can't add anything new. That's kind of the scope of what we're determining today, because that's what we told them we were going to make this decision based on. So I just wanted to, kind of refocus everyone to make sure we're not getting too out of scope for this conversation. I think all of those points are excellent points and things we should keep in mind as we move into the next solicitation process. So on that note, this is the last provisional grantee. So here's just a summary of what we discussed. There's those 4 provisional grantees, the amount that was awarded up to by the commission, and then the total pending disbursement is 127,207. And our staff recommendation was, to fund those as requested, but of course, that's up to you folks, what you recommend. So at this point, if there's no further conversation on those applications from you folks, I wanted to move to public comment. Is that okay with everyone, or do you want to continue the conversation? Good, okay, excellent.
Right, that's fine.
So we'll go ahead and pause for public comment. We have just 2 minutes set aside, and we'll move through it quickly if we don't have anyone who jumps forward with comments. But I will go quiet at this time, and let's leave it up to the public comment, see if anyone has anything to say. It doesn't seem like anyone is stepping forward to comment, so I'll just give it another shot. Any comments that folks want to add? No? All right, on that note, we're going to go ahead and close out the public comment period. So I put forward some language, proposed language, again, based on the conversation that we've been having today. We don't need to stick with this language. I do want to just note that, Latino Network will have to vote for separately because there is that conflict there. Are there any other conflicts with the provisional grantees where GAC members may not feel comfortable voting for any of the budgets there? Or is Latino Network the only one? Oh, guess it's the only one. So some of the applications, it seemed like they were kind of mixed feelings on, do we want to vote for them all together? Do we want to do them all separately? How would you guys like to proceed at this point?
So just to clarify, what we went back out, we gave people half the money. We said, we need you to answer these questions within reason, and then we'll give you the other, and we'll give you the other half. So the real question is, do we agree that they met that requirement? Is that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do we agree that they met that requirement? And if they did, then they're eligible for that 3 additional months of funding and a second disbursement of funds. I do want to note here too, and not to throw like a wrench in everything, but we did at the beginning of last week we were just informed that we're going to be able to do extensions to the end of September for all of our RJ grantees. So they would, if they're extended, this additional 3 months, also have the opportunity to extend their timeline if they so choose.
So it's a
Um,
no cost extension.
no cost extension, yes. Um,
That's great.
but yeah, so you're exactly right. The question is, do we feel like they met or responded to the concerns that were initially expressed? And if they did, do we want to then extend that project period and do the second disbursement?
So I think you, I don't hear anybody saying no to that. Maybe we could just vote.
And again, this was just a proposed language. So if folks do have concerns and want to vote on each application individually, we can absolutely go that route. We'll just need more, votes.
I'm happy voting with the voting in block.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, do we want to go ahead and vote to amend the contracts for Bridge Pomoja, Medicine Wheel Recovery Services, and TJC to extend the project period for an additional 3 months and award that second disbursement of funds up to the total award amount previously approved by the commission?
Yeah.
Okay, and Avery, do you mind doing a roll call vote?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, Tristan Edwards,
Yes.
Kathleen Meehan Coop,
Yes.
Shannon Wilson,
Yes.
Harry Naughton,
Yes.
Simon Fulford,
Yes.
Brandon Brown,
Yes.
Elaine Walters,
Yes.
and Jimena Ospina Todd.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so that passes.
Thank you, Avery. So let's go ahead and do the second one, and this is to vote to amend the contract for Latino Network to extend the project period for an additional 3 months and award a second disbursement of funds up to the total award amount previously approved by the commission. So let's go ahead and do roll call again.
Tristan Edwards,
Yes.
Kathleen Meehan Coop,
Yes.
Shannon Wilson,
Yes.
Harry Naughton,
Yes.
Simon Fulford,
Yes.
Brandon Brown,
Yes.
Elaine Walters,
Yes.
and then I believe we have the abstention from Jimena Ospina Todd, correct, Rima?
Abstain, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. All right, so both of those passed. So our next step obviously is going to be going in front of the commission for them to affirm your recommendation. And then we'll move forward with the contracting for those. So thank you for that. So next up, we have a look at the next solicitation for 2025-27. So, just a reminder, hopefully you folks all know the history at this point. I think the most important part to note here is that, the CJC budget bill includes a $4 million appropriation to continue this program. And obviously we're still in the midst of the legislative session. So we won't know, we won't know whether or not we're actually going to get these funds until July 1st, right? But given that we have so many programs that rely on this funding source, what we're kind of, and also because we've kind of moved this direction anyways, we found it to be successful. We kind of built out a process to start the solicitation process before we even get an answer about these funds, so that, once the funds are hopefully confirmed, we can do the second part of the application process, related to the budgets, and we can get those contracts out to folks faster that way. So there's, less or even no gap between when their current project ends and when their new contract period starts. Because like I said, we know that some folks really rely on these funds, and that gap can be quite painful. So that's sort of the overall theme of this, to keep in mind as we move forward. So, right today we have our first grant advisory committee meeting. What we're hoping to do is publish the solicitation on April 1st. And like I said, it'll be two parts. So the preliminary application really focuses on the narrative questions, and that will be due May 13th. We'll have another grant advisory committee meeting at that point. And we'll try and schedule that today by the end of our conversation here, to look at that narrative, and then that'll give you folks a chance to ask some of those more, those questions like, can we get more details on this? And I really like the suggestion to make them more specific. So we'll send those questions then back to all the applicants, and that'll give them a chance to respond. The final application will open shortly after that. Usually as soon as possible, just based on our turnaround time, sending out those questions and the feedback. As I mentioned, we won't know the budget for sure until July 1st. So the final application will be due after that point. And I didn't include it on this timeline, but we might need another, brief GAC meeting at that point in time, depending on the funding, to see if there's any different funding priorities, or, there's also the budget bill, or not budget bill, the SBO 938 that might set aside funds for technical assistance for restorative justice. Again, we don't know if that's moving forward or what that will look like if it is pushed forward. So we might have to schedule something in that period based on that or any other bills that come through. The final application due date that we have now, based on this timeline, is July 22nd, and that will include the budget and the responses to those questions. We'll have another grant advisory committee meeting to review all that final information and make those award recommendations. We're hoping to do the CJC commission presentation, as soon after that as possible. So that's July or September, or August or September, excuse me. And then the project period is going to begin most likely 10/1 for our existing grantees. In the solicitation, folks can actually go back to July 1st, to the beginning of the biennium. But, for those folks that opt in for an extension to September 30th, then their new contract would start October 1st to not have that gap period. So that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at. Any questions or comments at this point?
Just yes on that last piece. If people extend their contracts till September, that may be for only just a tiny little bit of stuff that they don't finish. So
Yep.
I'm worried that there could still be a gap there. So if they're spending at the rate that they normally would, and they have a few little things left that they're expending into that, then unless it backs up, there still will be a pretty significant gap potentially. And maybe it's not such a big deal because the contracts that we're talking about extending aren't going to be like that. But I just am hearing that in the equation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct, and it depends on the agency and where they're getting funding and all of that. They could request to go to get paid, back up to July 1st.
Okay,
That's the official start date. It's just that if they can stretch the funds, we're giving them the opportunity to do so, basically. But yeah, we're trying
So
to get
it's
this.
not either or, they all have the option to go back. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and this was really the solution we could come up with to shorten that gap period, just because we're waiting on those funds to be approved. So we couldn't move that piece up any further.
That
So,
makes sense. Thank
yeah.
you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments?
Is there,
Kathleen?
yeah, is there a way, I know I've applied for federal grants sometimes that you can apply early. And there's a big caveat when you're applying that everything depends on the funds being approved. Is that something that's allowed in the state?
For CJC, not at this time. It has been something that we've been discussing and looking into. But again, this two-part solicitation is kind of where we're at now with our contracts. Doing it a different way requires, consultation with Department of Justice on the legality and all that kind of stuff. So it is something we've discussed, but at this time, this is the most feasible. Any other questions or comments? All right, so this is all going to look real familiar because we just did this process. So again, the available funding is TBD, the project period July 1st, 2025 to August 30th, 2027. So we are also extending our regular contract time period a little bit for all of our grants. So this is kind of hopefully the standard moving forward, July to August, to give a little bit more time to spend down funds and to wrap up the project. Just a reminder, eligible applicants for this grant are public or private entities. There are two program types, established and implementation, according to the statute and rules. And let me back up a step too. I think based on some of the feedback from you folks and from our existing grantees, and based on our the higher level of interest from planning folks or new potential grantees that we got in that last round of supplemental funding, our thought was kind of to open it up and go back to almost the original application where we collected a lot more information rather than just extending projects for existing folks. So this is kind of, wipe the slate clean, get everyone to tell us where their program is right now, get a bunch of information, and then look at them all together and see what the whole spectrum kind of looks like. So that was the thought process behind this. So again, those eligible applicants and program types are just based on what's in the rules and statute. So the solicitation includes a program proposal, and then the second piece around the eligibility requirements and the preferences are very similar to the last application. In that they respond, do we have this program component, yes or no, and then there's some description possible as well. The preliminary questions are a little bit more detailed. So, initially we ask, what's your program's theory of change, goals, inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. And we actually are going to include a sample theory of change in the format of a table so folks can kind of fill in more detail and structure rather than just being a long narrative if they prefer. I really like tables because I don't know, I like things organized. But so we have this as an appendix of how they can answer that question. And Tristan, I see your hand up. What would you like to say?
Are you taking feedback on this grant application from us right now? Is this an appropriate time to offer that?
We can take feedback. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that, one of the things that has been raised, this just review meeting has been kind of like being careful about what we are asking and being specific about what we really want to know. And I feel like questions like, what is your theory of change, are so vague as to elicit answers that could give us a lot of information, but not necessarily the information that we are specifically seeking. I have some suggestions just in terms of like what I want to know from all of these grantees, because if we get a $4 million pot of funding, it is going to be a very competitive grant. And I can also see a scenario where maybe one or two, or maybe several of the existing or established grant programs aren't kind of meeting the, what we would hope to see over the last like 3 years. And maybe some of the new programs seem really promising and we might want to invest there. And so I would really like a lot of detail, especially since, we've seen that, some of these planning grants are, even after 2 rounds of applications, aren't giving us as much detail as we want. So my suggestions for the established programs, I want to know how many cases they've had.
Mhm.
And if they haven't had the number of cases that they, was kind of like their goal, I want a really detailed paragraph on what they are doing to try and increase the number of cases that they have. And I would also like to know kind of what goes into a case like this. Like it's going to be different if you're handling a low level misdemeanor versus if you are handling a higher level felony. And so like, what are the number of hours that are going into each case? What is the number of work? Is part of the reason that like case referrals might be low because of actually it turns out there's a lot more work? Is it because, oh, our system partner is not sending us enough cases? Is it because we need to diversify our referral stream and like we are working on that by, making X, Y, and Z partnerships? Like I want real information about what the case numbers are and how those are going to improve if they're not at where we want them to be. And I want to know about system partner referral and community referral. Who are the system partners that are currently in partnership with that restorative justice program, if there are any? And if there aren't any system partners, or if the system partners are not supplying the enough cases, what are the community-based organizations that are connected to that program that may also be willing to give referral? What are the number of cases that those community partners have been giving? Like I want real details about where these cases are coming from and how many cases there are. I want to know how the programs are identifying success for people going through their programs and what their rate of success has been. And I also would like more information about how harmed parties are served. And if harmed parties are not being served as much as would be hoped, like what is the plan to fix that and to integrate more services for harmed parties? The other thing that, and this is for new grantees, my suggestions for new grantees.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, like we've talked about it a lot today, but just a lot more specificity on like, what is this program going to look like? And I guess I should say that I would caveat this with saying that I think it would be appropriate, and I'll allow other members of the committee to disagree with me if they disagree, but I think it would be appropriate if a planning grant said we need, still part of our period is going to be 6 more months to continue planning. One of the programs, pre-existing programs that we have, the established program, Six Rivers Dispute Resolution, they did a year-long planning period and they have an incredibly successful program. And so I am not opposed to some of that implementation granting still being, we need more time to plan, but I still want specificity as to what that plan is and what the outcomes are. Who are the referral partners that they are talking to? Is it only system partners? Is it community-based organizations? What is their method of trying to engage with referral partners? How are they going about in making sure that their restorative justice facilitators are appropriately trained to take the kinds of cases that they are planning to take? Just a clear understanding of how, like, just like the nuts and bolts of, okay, if you get a referral, then what are the next steps in terms of someone going through your program? What does your program look like? Where is the dialogue process happening? What does the preparation process look like? How long do you expect that to happen? And also explaining where that kind of like alternative to the criminal legal system takes place. And I hope that it is clear to applicants that like, that can be community referral. If it's never touching the system, then that's where that kind of alternative takes place. But if it is a system partner referral, what is their hope? Is it going to be pre-charge? Is it going to be your classic diversion? Like just more specificity, I guess, is essentially what I'm saying. And then I would also want to know what the target number of cases are during the biennium period and a detailed plan of how they expect to get to that case number. And I think, of course, really emphasizing how they are planning to support harmed parties and what that looks like. I think that's one of the things that makes this really different than your typical diversion programs. And I think it's something that we need to continue to emphasize because, of course, we kind of put this onus on, okay, how is this going to be an alternative to the system? And that is pertaining to, the responsible party. But I think we need to put just as much emphasis on reminding applicants that this is looking at both people. This is seeking to serve both people and with a prioritization around harm parties and kind of effectuating their healing. So I think there also just needs to be, a lot of detail asked around how harm parties are going to be served and what the plan is for engaging harm parties. And of course, making sure that that is voluntary and trauma informed, but just kind of requiring a good amount of information around what that's going to look like for those new programs. All right, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. It looked, maybe I'm wrong, but it looked kind of like you were reading off of a list or something. If folks want to write down their recommendations and email it to us, we'd be happy to look at them. I do want to note, we might not be able to incorporate all of them. We are trying to move forward as quickly as possible, but there are ways that we could get to some of that information if you feel they're not in the spelled out in the application question. So we do want to get that feedback and kind of look at it. And it looks like Kathleen has her hand up next.
I want to ditto what Tristan just said. Those were kind of on my general list. I also want to suggest when the original application came out, there was some main questions, and the amount of space that was provided to be able to provide information was very limited. And then there was frequently a lot of sub questions under that main question, and each one of those could have taken up all of the word count. I know, no doubt there's a balance in, we don't want 30 page proposals to review, otherwise you really struggle on remembering the details and doing a good quality review. But making sure that we're providing people with enough space, a large enough word count to truly answer the questions effectively. So we're more likely to get a lot of those details that Tristan outlined.
So that's a good point to check in on. The way it is right now, though we haven't built the actual application, that first question, so with all of these sub-questions, I think it's 500 words or less, but we could increase that. And then there's this optional theory of change upload where they can provide additional information. Does that seem too small? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was that 500 words for all those questions?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, too small.
Okay. Would 750 be a better number?
I think that
If I can just chime in, and I know I said this before, but I mean, I'm willing to read a longer grant application. If we are going to be splitting $4 million amongst 15 programs, I want more information. I think it's just going to be more work for this grant review committee than it's been in the past, because we've had the luxury of always having enough money to, fit the programs that are applying. It's just not necessarily going to be the case next time around. And so I think 1,000 words is fine. I think asking more questions is fine. Like, I'm going to want lots of details because we're going to have to make some really hard decisions. And I'm going to feel super uncomfortable if I have the same level of detail that we had this planning grant period to try and make those decisions. So I'm happy to read some longer grants.
I appreciate that feedback. So, and you guys are absolutely right. There is always tension between how we ask the question and the information we get back and the length. We have people that respond that they really love short answers and that people that respond that they could write, forever when we ask about that. Our internally, our process for developing the solicitations has been leaning more and more to sticking to the language that's in the rules, and making sure that the application really aligns with that. We included these additional questions, and we haven't gone through all of them yet, but I completely hear your feedback, to try and get at some of that stuff. So I do just want to say, again, this feedback is incredibly valuable. I don't know how much we're going to be able to incorporate all of it into this application, but in the actual questions, but there are other places we could incorporate some of this. And I'm not saying we can't do it either. I just, I'm going to bring all the feedback to the team and see where we're at.
And just to follow on that, I like your table idea, and I think that might be an easy way to incorporate it. But I agree. I think calling it like theory of change may cause some confusion to applicants. But I think putting it saying, hey, what are your goals or what are you hoping to achieve? It's pretty much kind of really what it's outlined to be. Putting in specific numbers, I think that may be a way of collecting that information in a really honestly easy to read format, rather than it sometimes gets lost in the narratives.
Right.
But I might just
Okay.
change the title of what that is, so people really understand they're outlining their goals and how they're going to achieve that goal.
We can absolutely do that. And some of those things that you mentioned, Tristan, are kind of incorporated in this table. We could add more detail here on the kinds of things that we want them to include without specifically putting it like answer all these questions. So just keep that in mind. And I see that Simon's hand is up next, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yes, support everything. It doesn't have to, I would like this exercise for folks to make a very convincing proposal, and you don't need to spend thousands of words doing that. You need to be very specific on how you are going to, get your referrals, where they're coming from, very much in, and then what's the process. And so if they can, in whether it's 100 words or 1,000 words, it's up, preferably not 1,000, but to really demonstrate that they will achieve the outputs, they will deliver the activities, they will get the outputs, and they will get the outcomes. And they just got to provide a convincing case. If it's wishy-washy, woolly, lack of detail, then it's not going to pass muster, because it doesn't actually demonstrate. I kind of echo what's been said before. I echo that there needs to be strong focusing of the harmed party. I feel like a lot of, particularly this round of planning grants, have totally lost view of the presumptive sentence and more serious harms. And I would personally like to see that, because I think that is the intent of the funding. I think you can only, I would highly recommend there's not a different application for existing programs, longer funded versus the planning ones. There could be a question of, does your project require, a additional planning process? That's up to them to make that a convincing case that there's more planning needed. And if they're still going to show to me that they'll get great outputs and outcomes with 6 more months of planning, awesome. So I think you've got to have one standard application, that you cannot have 2 for an open grant process.
Thank you for sharing. And was that all of it, or did you have more? Sorry.
I'll stop there.
You can continue. I don't mean to cut you
I'm
off. And like I said, please, if you have these comments written down, you can email them to us, so that we can kind of look at everything and take it all into consideration. Going back to my earlier comment about, keeping things close to the rules and statute. So these all also have to go through Department of Justice review to make sure that they align with those things. So that's another point that we always have to consider. We can't add too many additional requirements on that aren't in the actual rules and statute. But again, there are ways that we can kind of try and get this information. Brandon, it looks like you're next.
Sorry, bear with me. I'm fighting a cold right now, so
Thanks for joining
my
us.
voice goes out. Couple questions. One, you had said this grant, this upcoming one will be wiping the slate clean. What does that necessarily mean?
So I think we've heard from, several folks, through our previous grant extension processes, the grant advisory committee opted to, only fund existing grantees or, in this last round, existing grantees or new planning applicants. We're trying not to narrow the scope of who is applying right now and just go back to what's listed specifically in the statute as being an eligible applicant. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And then my second part is what is considered a new applicant?
So at this point, again, we wouldn't have that distinction. It's just what was specifically listed in the statute and rules. So established versus implementation. We're not limiting the funding to either one of those. People just have to identify as one or the other based on how they categorize themselves.
Okay.
But there's no limitation to only do established, for example, or priority structure at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then I thought there was another hand up. Elaine.
And so, yes, and more yes. And I know that we have some limitations to what we can change. I do think that there's some ways we can get to more specificity.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm interested in, even though we're doing the wiping the slate clean and sort of people can apply from these backgrounds, especially for people that are existing programs, but for people that have been funded so far through this funding, I think it's really critical that there be a feedback loop.
Mhm.
And to that, I mean that in a couple of ways. One is not just reports on inputs and outputs, but also where are the failures in the system? What does the system need more support around to make go better? And just an example is, those partnerships that are actually very challenging because there are actual efforts to interfere with using restorative justice as an alternative to regular criminal, to the conventional system. Where do those exist in the state? What's our leverage? What are people's experiences in moving the needle on some of that? I would like that information to come back from the grantees that have already been funded. Where are the biggest challenges? Where are the biggest where are the needs for potential additional effort or attention from not necessarily that individual program, but from outside? And I think that is something that I'm really hoping that we're influencing is the quality and access to these resources, because we've made a dent in the systems that have actually actively worked against this response. So that's one thing I would really like to see back. And I would like to see some of that in the applications for people who are building on existing programs that are expanding or supporting existing programs. It is what are your biggest challenges? I can pay somebody 40 hours a week to be in the office and not have work to do. So the input is the same. I'm putting in this much money and this many hours, but there are barriers to the outcomes and the outputs. And I want to know what those are. And I want people to write in their applications where those challenges have been, what they're doing to address them, and how they can show that what they're doing is making a difference. So part of it is case numbers. That's one particular, but the other is, is maybe something we could get from them, which is what have been your challenges to the outcomes that you are trying to accomplish, and how do you propose using this funding to address them? And so I really want a question in there that helps us build a picture statewide of what's happening, what's possible, and what's not, and what's been blocked. And some of that is our reporting structure for people that have had this funding. Some of it could be in our application, because people are doing their best, and sometimes they're spending a lot of money and not getting very far very fast. And if we need to be helping a different way besides just putting money towards staff that aren't having work to do, I want to know what those things are. As a taxpayer, but also as this committee, and also as people promoting this work.
I think that is a great question. And again, please write it down and send it to us. I'm writing it down too, but it's always more helpful if it comes from you folks directly. So let's put that into the mix and think about how that can be incorporated into the structure that we have, as we go through it. We do ask questions like that on the semi-annual reports. So we do have some information, but again, folks' responsiveness to these questions varies very greatly. So some people gave good information about some of the challenges, and some gave more abrupt or abbreviated information.
Well, and maybe just to add one sort of way that I've seen it done, and that is, what do people, where are we asking questions about people's capacity and expertise? Like, how can they show that they actually have what it takes to do what they're proposing? And that would be true for a planning grant, like just a description of how they're going to contract with somebody to facilitate and all of that, but in an actual a funded program, how can they show that they are in position and have what it takes in their budget and in their proposal to meet these outcomes? It's a capacity question, or a competency question, or a infrastructure question.
Right.
But it is how can you show how are you set up to meet those, to have those outcomes, to have those outputs?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we can change in that table. Tristan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I want to just kind of uplift some of the stuff that Elaine has been saying, because I think that even though we are going to need really detailed information and it's going to be a competitive grant, I also want to be considerate of the fact that it's hard to implement these kinds of programs. And so, I don't want us just to be asking, like, how many case numbers do you have? I also want a follow-up question of, if this is a challenge for you, then what are the steps that you're taking? What is the plan for addressing this issue? The other thing that I just wanted to mention is, though I understand that, it's important to stick to kind of like the rules and making sure that people are in compliance with the rules. For these established programs, we've already decided that they are in compliance with the rules, that they meet that baseline criteria. Now we're at a point where we need more details about how that's going, like what is the success or not, so that we can kind of compare all of these amongst themselves to make those allocations. And so of course they need to comply with the rules, but I think we're a little bit beyond, at least for the established grants. I think we're beyond, like, do you meet the baseline criteria? And now we need like real details on like, how is that going?
I think that's an excellent point. And again, there's tension on where we can ask those questions. Like I said, in the solicitation that has to go through Department of Justice, they tend to want it to be focused on what is in the rules. We have a little bit of leeway here because there is that written in the rules that, we can consider other things that the commission and GAC include, right? Which is what we're trying to gather here, but there always is a balance. So please hold on to that thought. One of the things that I wanted to bring up that we've been discussing internally is how to kind of build out what a successful program what we want to see, what a successful program looks like, so we can do those more objective comparisons that we have for some of our more longer standing programs, like the JRI stuff. This program has been in the very initial stages so far, build up, planning, all of that. I don't know if we're there yet, but with all these questions, they kind of touch on having some type of standard, assessment or thing that we're tracking. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. And I'm just talking off the top of my head, and I definitely need another cup of coffee. So please let me know if I'm not making sense. I hope that responded to your suggestion. I guess I'm just trying to say we're hearing all these concerns. We want to gather them, and we want to see them implemented, although there might be different opportunities for implementing them in different ways, I guess, if that makes sense. So going back to these preliminary application questions. So the second question is around who is eligible to participate in your program, and that's including referral sources, referral sources, service area, projected operational capacity, who is eligible, how will they be screened, where will your referrals come from, and at what stage in the criminal or juvenile system do they occur? The third question is about the methods, ability, and means for collecting data, and then a timeline of program milestone and activities. So those are kind of the preliminary application questions that are written out so far, with some additional detail in this, sample theory of change table that we can change the name of and add more detail to. So I know you folks mentioned a lot in addition to that don't get mentioned in these questions. So again, if you can, we have the recording for this conversation. If you can write them down and send them to me, please do so. If there's anything specifically that comes to mind right now that you want to share with the group, please do so as well. Yeah, okay. And again, we kept the word limits kind of short for these sub-questions, but they can be increased. Okay. So the next slides just kind of run through the grant program requirements again, which, you folks are very, very familiar with at this point. Like I mentioned, the application, the way it's designed now, is to be very similar to how it was the last time, where, folks are asked, does your program center on the experiences of those harmed? They can answer yes, no, to identify that themselves, and then they're provided a little bit more room to explain. So that's how it's going to be for all of the grant program eligibility requirements and the preferences. And that seemed to work pretty well the last round, and seemed to be a pretty good balance of, getting specific information for each one and not being too lengthy and difficult to complete. So that's how it's set up now. Any questions or comments about that? I'm hoping the quietness is because you guys gave so much feedback initially and not because this is all terrible and you want to scrap the whole thing.
We stole your thunder.
Okay. So, as built in, part of our normal process is to do that initial staff review where we look at the eligibility and completeness. We have an internal scoring sheet that we can potentially include as an attachment, which has for folks that were part of the initial round of applications where you guys actually did the score sheet, and it had all those detailed questions, including some of those that you brought up in this conversation, like caseload capacity and all that. This score sheet that we have for our internal review is very similar to that. So I know a lot of research and conversation went into that initial score sheet about what makes a good program. So we did include that as our first initial staff review. And we chose to do that because when we do this type of score sheets with grant review committees or grant advisory committees, it tends to be very difficult for people to go through in that level of detail in the timeframes that we have with their regular jobs. And staff can kind of do that initial scoring, do the initial, bucketing or whatever we want to call it, to say who is most responsive, who is medium responsive, or, whatever it ends up being based on the applications. And have that framework set up when we go into that grant advisory committee meeting. So that was kind of our plan. And we can also incorporate some of those recommendations that you guys have already been giving into that staff review process. So Elaine, it looks like you have a comment.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when we were talking earlier about sort of getting an increase. So I've heard a couple of things that I think could be incorporated. One is, some more, and Simon, to your point about not wanting 1,000 words, allowing 1,000 words doesn't mean people have to use 1,000 words, but allowing more space. And then just being very clear that this process is going to be extremely competitive. So just being very transparent about that as the programs have grown around the state, which was the goal, this process will be competitive in a different way. So being very transparent about that. And then whatever we end up using for the way we're grading or assessing, making that available to the grant applicants, so that they can see what we're looking for. So that if we make more space, for example, that we are really clear what we want them to do with that space. That we want detail in particular around blah blah blah, or around where they are going to be shining or showing whatever it is that's matching this score sheet and this evaluation process that we're going through. So I think those things would make this lean in the direction that Tristan is talking about, which is because it is true that if we had to pick between some of these, one or the other, I wouldn't have had enough information to decide between them. And that's going to be different this time. So if we have a longer word length, if we have a clear set of things that we're scoring for, and if the applicants do as well, I think that could really, without changing any of the way you're using the words to match the rules or any of that, I think it would get at what we're needing in this next round.
Thank you for that feedback. You're very good at summarizing and applying everything. So I appreciate that. So this, again, this score sheet was used in that initial round or something very similar to it. I did make some changes because the applications aren't exactly the same. It was published with the RFGP, that first initial round. So I don't see a reason why we couldn't do that. I'm going to have to check on all of these things to see if there is a reason internally, but there's nothing I can think of now why we couldn't publish this more detailed rubric of what we're looking at in the applications, along with the application in one of the attachments. I did want to note two things as well. One, we do always do a solicitation webinar for applicants, and we'll be doing that this time as well, probably in, the beginning of April, right after the solicitation is released. And we can go over some of that in terms of how we expect people to reply during that webinar. And then I do also want to note, no matter how the question is asked, we'll get people that interpret it differently and don't give us the information we want. But we do have this two-part process now where we're going to be doing the review on the narratives, and you folks will have a chance to ask those questions. and the applicant will have a chance to respond to your questions for the final application. So we did, we do have that built in. So if there are pieces missing in their responses that, were touched on in their original application, but we just want more clarity on, we can definitely do that as part of that question and final application process. Any other comments? Okay. As I mentioned, so the second part will be that final application. We'll have, we'll send them the specific questions we have in email for each applicant, and then they'll have an option to basically redo whatever part that we're asking them about in their final application, and then they'll also upload the budget at that point in time. And we did include, usually the budget is very open-ended, but I did want to at least state the justification, show how each requested line item meet or fulfills the purpose intent of the program. Any questions or comments on that? No, okay. Making me nervous. You guys were so vocal and now you're so quiet. Okay. So moving on, GAC roles and responsibilities. Again, you guys should be intimately familiar with this. We literally just went through this process a couple months ago. But just as a reminder, your folks' role is to evaluate the applications, discuss them, and approve which applications get sent to the commission for review. As part of this process, always be aware of conflicts and make sure that we know if there are any actual or potential conflicts, which would result in a financial benefit or loss to anyone on the grant advisory committee. Just make sure to disclose those ahead of time so you can abstain from any conversation or voting around those applications. And again, when we do the staff analysis, once we get to the actual review, if you have any additional information besides what we've discussed on what types of information you would like to see during that initial preliminary application review meeting, please let me know. Or if you have any idea on how those preferences are applied. Similar to what we did before, we can highlight that information on the slides, so it's all right there in front of you during your discussion. As always, once the RFGP is published, we can't score based on any additional criteria or information not already included in the application. We have a little bit of leeway there because we have the two-part process, so they can respond to your questions. But we couldn't come up with a whole new criteria item at that point in time, if that makes sense. So is there anything else that hasn't been mentioned that you want to make sure we highlight when we go through those initial applications? I don't know if you remember from the last GAC presentation, but like there was that summary slide with the project information showing that they met the eligibility criteria. The second slide was about preferences, and then you had highlighted some stuff about referrals and community partners that we included on those slides and training that we included on those slides. And then we went into the budget. So that's kind of the format of what we did last time. So if there's any additional information you want to see for everyone, please let us know.
I think based upon the conversation today, it might be interesting to know what their, and I don't necessarily know how much detail we need, but something, maybe how many cases they're hoping to achieve, something that kind of highlights some of those big goals that they were going for.
Okay.
I think, yes, it'd be nice to get some sort of output and outcomes somehow. And then there have to be some sort of way of the nuance of, you know, a project that is proposing to take, I'm going to make some simple language, excuse me, you know, some sort of quote lower level cases may have a higher volume than a project that is proposing to take some very complex, you know, serious harm, serious interpersonal violence, you know, etc., which take a lot longer to sort through, as it were. So there need to be some sort of qualifying, so that we're not just saying, oh, they got 200 cases, awesome, versus somebody else's 20 sort of thing. I think I would like really heavy weighting personal preference on a credible, just credible evidence of their referral, a strong referral process. That has been a huge piece of the planning process of over the last 3 years. And that needs to really show, I think, the strength of how they'll get referrals through, whether that's through systems or through community, it doesn't matter, but that's got to be super credible and backing up evidence to show why that's a credible proposal.
So would that be like a description of referral partners, number of referrals they've received, and number of clients that actually engaged in the program or something like that? What would credible evidence look like?
I think it could be, it's probably going to look different for different, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So,
okay.
You know, it could be, you know, signed and strong MOUs with system partners, or signed MOUs with community referral partners. You know, some projects may have a track record of referrals, but that would kind of penalize those that are just coming out of a planning phase, who may not necessarily demonstrate the track record, but they've got to somehow demonstrate that all that planning will actually 100% result in referrals, and that we're not 18 months down and there's still no cases in that project.
Okay, yeah, so I think I have a better understanding now. Some of that information we could get from the table if they choose to fill it out that way. Yep. And we do have optional uploads for MOUs and that sort of thing that I didn't show but would be part of the application. So it sounds like that's something we could get from the information that we're requesting. And Tristan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just in terms of the kind of information that you show on your slide. I mean, I want to know number of cases. I think breaking this down between misdemeanor, felony, and offenses, which I know can span both of those, would be helpful. I want to know who partners are. I want to know the number of parties served.
Tristan,
you're kind of breaking up a little bit.
Sorry, my audio is this any better?
Yeah, that's a little better.
Okay, I'll turn my camera. Okay, so that helps. Yeah, I was just saying I want, sorry, where did I leave off so I don't just repeat myself?
It started breaking up around the misdemeanor and felony cases. You want to know who the referral partners are, and then I lost it after that.
Yeah, I want to know the number served. I think also to the extent that there are program graduates, we can assess at least some degree of success just based on like how many graduated, how many people have failed from the program. Just kind of some of those basic numbers, which are we shouldn't take it necessarily at face value. Like we'll want to have more details in the application as to kind of like more information to all of those, but those are some of the raw numbers that I think I would like to know up front.
Okay. So some of that, so if we go back, I'll have to look. I mean, this is all the instruction that's included in this theory of change thing. We can incorporate some of that here more specifically, and in the staff review, I'll have to look at both of those and kind of see where it makes sense to put those in. But I think those are things we can at least suggest that they include. as a
Yeah,
response to those questions?
especially when it comes to cases, like number of cases, I see how we are making firms are doing well.
You're breaking up again.
So I get trying to emphasize, like, I don't know how we assess the relative success of even firms who don't have the case information. It just seems
Right.
like
I got part of that. How you don't know how we would rate the success without the relative case information?
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. I
and
just I don't see how we have solutions that don't ask about that, because there's a program that's been in existence for, almost 3 years, and they've had 2 cases. We need
Tristan, we're losing you again.
yeah, I think I get the gist of what you're saying, but again, if you could just write that down. Sorry to give you guys like homework, but it is really helpful to get it directly from you, in addition to our notes and recording. So um I have it on my list, but it would be great if you could send it my way as well. And it looks like Elaine, you have another hand up.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I were a legislator and I'm trying to devote another $4 million to something, I want to know what you're doing with that money. And I think we need to think about it in those terms. I also think we need to be able to show that we're making a difference in outcomes for the levels of recidivism and new crimes that people commit. I mean, I think we've got to show those numbers, and it's a little odd to me that is just in a table and it's not someplace really up front in this application. That I mean, of course, if people are working with serious cases, they're going to be able to handle less of those. But their way of doing that needs to be something that they can show. And so again, I mean, if I'm a new program of any kind on the planet and I'm getting state money to do it, I need to be able to sort of predict and then answer to the numbers served, the kinds of cases that I'm working with, and what the outcomes of the work I've done are, including program completion rates, and then reuptake of the justice system when a case doesn't go through our process. Those are the numbers we're trying to put a dent in, and it seems to me those will be the numbers that we need to answer to, and that will show that this is making a difference. So, yeah,
Yep.
I think it needs to be front and center.
Okay. Your comment is noted, and again, we'll take a look and see what and how we can incorporate this feedback. So, sorry, moving forward, because I think we're kind of discussing this other considerations piece right now. Again, this is stuff that we've been talking about. We have the opportunity to refer all of these things like referral pathways, community collaboration, program components you guys talked about previously and you're talking about today. Hopefully we can make some of those adjustments that you mentioned. The RFGP structure does allow for you guys to ask questions and for them to respond in that final application, which will hopefully be another, stopgap to get some of that information. I did want to note, we know it's work since we don't have the confirmation of funding, and we're asking folks to do this initial application process without a guarantee that the funds will be there. But that seemed to be the best solution to keep the contracts rolling and make sure the programs got support. And then what we've really been talking a lot about is this building a definition of what a successful or what a program should look like. And I think this is a question that we all have. I know we've been talking internally about this as well. And you guys are always so fantastic at just being so invested and thorough and detailed about what you want to see and what these programs should look like and how they should operate. And we really appreciate that. So I think one of the things that just kind of will be an ongoing discussion point is going to be this point of what what we want to see in the programs, if there's possibility to build like a scorecard, like our specialty court grants have, like our JRI programs have, to kind of not penalize, but tell people how they're doing in comparison to how a great program would look like. And then, what we do with our other grants is offer, opportunities for assistance or tell folks to direct funding into areas where they're weaker, have that kind of dialogue be possible. I also wanted to note that we are, again, we had kind of a slow start. We do have some data now, especially with the last couple quarters. So we have been discussing internally what we can do. Oh, excuse me. What we can do with the data that we have, and if it's possible to look at something beyond just the service counts that are being submitted to us now, to see any outcomes. And we're still kind of exploring that, what that might look like. So I wanted to throw that out there. Kathleen, did you have another comment?
Yeah, actually two things. Number one, is it possible for us to see one of those scorecards that you provide to like the JRI program? And then I guess, and one of my thoughts was along what you were just saying, I think one of the struggles on the current funding cycle is that there's a lot of, as we're sending, as information is being sent in on specific numbers, I have a feeling there's a lot of different definitions on how people are defining things. And I know that was one request that was made earlier, and having, specific definitions, and so that there's consistent information being provided across all the programs, for better tracking going forward.
Yeah. Again, great suggestions. I'm going to see if I can find maybe a specialty court scorecard to see what, nope, that's not it. See if I can show you what it looks like. It's very similar to, that.
Is it like a rubric?
Yeah, that rubric.
Okay.
That you saw, but it just has different, like with specialty courts, they actually have best practices. There's national best practices. So the scorecard looks at, how they respond to different questions about national best practices. And then some other things. We can send that out to you after this meeting. So I'm not shuffling through all the folders.
That would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay. And again, this is a longer term conversation. This program still is pretty new. We never want to be so prescriptive in what we're looking at that we're discounting or discluding programs that might be beneficial, that don't quite fit into those definitions. I think CJC is really always coming from a point of saying yes and helping people getting there, rather than penalizing people. But it is, like I said, a conversation we always have, because we're always getting asked for different programs about how successful they are. Are they achieving the goals that we want them to? So I think this is a good time to have this conversation, since it's been in existence a couple years now. So we have a little bit more information. And Elaine?
Yes, and to that point that this is a longer conversation, I'll keep this super short, and that is, one of the things I think that's been tricky is that this is part of a larger continuum of restorative practice. And so this funding is very specific. And so we've had to really kind of limit the scope while also saying yes to creativity and giving a lot of room. And I wouldn't want to lose some of the nuanced, unique things that people are doing in their communities. But I think for the longer conversation, I would really like to think about how the work of this sort of bounded, pre-adjudicated, sentence presumed kind of approach fits into the larger continuum, and how we're building up beyond the edges as well. But again, I'll save that for the longer conversation. But I am noticing in myself that I keep veering out of the limits of this specific funding in my mind. And part of what I want to know is how this part fits into the larger picture of restorative work that's happening. And so for future reference, just a bookmark there.
Okay. Yeah. And again, you guys are so engaged and give such great feedback for all of these things. So I feel really, really lucky, and that we can, keep moving forward in developing these things in a really thoughtful way. So I know CJC really appreciates that. Like I said, we'll take all this feedback and try and see where we can fit it in different things that we have moving forward. With the RFGP specifically, we always have to look at what we can ask and what we can't based on how the solicitation process works and the rules and all of that. But we will take all this stuff into consideration, absolutely. And if we can't fit it there, we'll try and fit it into other parts of the process moving forward. So hopefully that, and always if, if you have other suggestions or you don't feel like we did enough or have a good enough reason for what we did do, we take feedback on how we can do better always, all the time as well. Any other comments about what we've discussed today? We're actually about an hour early, so we could continue the conversation now, or you guys could move on to the next part of your day. Just to go through the next steps that we're looking at. So the commission review of the RFGP is happening on the 20th. This is kind of a new step that we've been adding, similar to how we brought it forward to you guys to get your comments. The commission has opportunity to add additional requirements. So we've been kind of starting to present it to them as well for their feedback. As I mentioned, we're aiming to open the solicitation on 4/1. We're also looking to open that grantee extension, the no cost extension requests 4/1, and those would be due 4/25. So that will be on the same, it's going to be part of the quarterly reporting that's due during that time period. Hopefully very simple opt-in like we've done in the past. Like I mentioned, we'll be doing the webinar in early April. And then I guess what's left on our agenda is scheduling that next grant advisory committee meeting for after May 13th. Between May 13th and the end of June, for doing that initial round of review for those applications. So I don't know if we want to do that now, or if folks want to keep moving forward with the discussion, or how you want to proceed forward here.
I personally, I don't feel like my brain's getting a little overwhelmed, so I don't feel more discussion from myself. I don't need, and I'm happy to try and do a lovely collective scheduling process to lock in a date. I'd rather do it now than by doodle poll, because by the time everyone responds, we've lost half the dates anyway.
We can look for a preliminary date and do the scheduling, and then follow up by doodle poll if we're not able to. But let's go with your suggestion and try and do it. So again, the initial preliminary application is going to be due May 13th. So anything that's maybe like the last week of May into any of those 4 weeks, 5 weeks of June could be a potential date for our next GAC meeting.
how long do you need to do that preliminary step as staff before it will make sense for us? Like, what's the soonerish end of that from your staff perspective?
Depending on how many applications we get, we got a lot more than we anticipated this last time. So I would think maybe moving it into June would be good just to,
First week of June, maybe?
yeah, first week or two of June would be nice. So we have a little bit more cushion.
So this is a Monday, probably not anybody's favorite day, but now it's finished.
We and the other question is how long we want to set aside for this meeting. Traditionally, when we do our initial grant advisory or grant review committee meetings, we try and schedule them for a full day. We haven't necessarily had as many applications for this program, but we also have run into time constraints when we only did like 2 hours. So I would say 4 hours to a full day would be preferable. So I don't know if that throws a wrench in the scheduling or not. But does anyone have a good chunk of time, 4+ hours available the first week of June?
I would on the 5th.
The 5th, okay.
Or the 6th, possibly.
I am so sorry to do this. I am supposed to be in trial during the first part of June. I will do my best. The week of the 9th, I can't schedule anything.
Okay.
And the week of the 2nd is kind of hard for me. I'm wondering if folks could do the 16th of June.
Sometime during that week or that day specifically?
The 16th or the 17th I can do. I'm not available on the 18th. The 19th is a holiday. I could do the 20th, but
Okay.
I don't know if people are trying to make that long week.
I can't do the 16th or the 17th. Well, that is not true. I could do all morning, either one of those. No, I could do all morning on the 16th, all the way up to 2.
Okay.
I can do all morning on the 16th. This is Jimena too.
Okay. That's 3 people so far.
I'm available on the 16th as well.
Okay. 4 people.
Simon's available the 16th.
5 people.
I'm available until noon or probably 11:45 on the 16th.
Okay. So that would get us quorum. That's 6 people. If we scheduled from like 8 or 9 a.m. to noon.
Yeah.
Do we want to try for that then?
Yeah, and I guess we should go for the 8 if folks have to leave early.
Okay. Well, we'll send out a meeting invitation for that time period, and we'll check in with you as we get closer just to make sure everyone is still available and we still have that quorum. You know, this was really fantastic today. We got pretty much everyone on the grant advisory committee. And like I said, these conversations are so great. So we really want everyone to attend and participate. If we can get that kind of attendance again, I would be absolutely thrilled.
And way to stick up for what you need, Tristan.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
So yeah, we'll send that out. That'll be a next step too. Again, please send me your written feedback. We'll do our best to add in some of those details to the suggested response table and to the at least to the internal scoring sheet so folks can see what it is we're going to be looking at. We can talk about it during the RFGP process. And, after we look through all of your feedback and rewatch the recording for this, see if there's any other opportunities as well to get some of that feedback in. And move forward with the RFGP. Any other questions or comments or concerns for CJC at this time? No? Okay. Well, here's a picture of my sister's dogs.
Perfect.
Make everyone smile. They're adorable. They're super friendly. yeah, so yeah, please follow for those emails. We've got the next GAC meeting scheduled. We're gonna move right ahead through all of this, and I really, really appreciate, again, I can't say enough how great it is that you guys are so engaged and so vocal and just giving so much feedback and detailed, questions and time and energy to this program. So thank you guys very much. Right.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Oh, Kathleen, did she already jump off? Maybe I can check with her.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.